Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Thursday's edition of the evening lecture. Is that a little bit better? I'd like to remind everybody on our upcoming lectures in February we have Russ Rollison will be talking about our land grants and how those affected the history of West Virginia and some of the property rights and property issues and things. And then coming up later in the month, I don't have it right here in front of me, but the commissioner will be talking about opera in West Virginia. I don't have it's not on our website yet, but as soon as we get that information, we'll have that up on our website. For our upcoming lectures, to see all the way up into April on the upcoming lectures, if you go to our website, West Virginia, wbculture.org/history, you go to our webpage. Over on the right-hand side, you'll see some of the upcoming events and things, and some of the photo exhibits, various other things, Terry Lowry's Civil War, a lot of bibliography, where things are, what information we do have as far as Civil War. But right in the very top of our webpage there, when you go down just an inch or so from the top, depending on how big your monitor is, I guess. But there's the events, what's coming up in the Archives and History, and click on that and you can go to another place on our page there, and it'll tell about upcoming events, lectures on Tuesdays and Thursday nights, usually the first Tuesday and the third Thursday of the month. And those are up until April, I believe. And we have several coming up, several speakers coming up that many of you remember. Dr. Rakes will be talking again. Dr. Billy Joe Pate will be talking again. There's several others down through there. So if you go to that part of our webpage, you'll see some of our upcoming lectures. There's also photo exhibits and things like that. Ed Hicks, the photo archivist, he works on a lot of the photos. If you're interested in those are on our website where you can go and take a look at them. There is also film clips and things like that, and Dick Fowles, he's right back here, he's actually filming it for tonight. There's a lot of film clips and things on our YouTube channel. There's a lot of things there that you may want to look at, various things that has come to us. So there's other things scattered throughout our website, so if you want to take a look at those, enjoy them. Tonight, genealogy research strategies is one of the things, and I'm hoping that I hit most of you all on what you're expecting and what you're thinking about. The archives here has tons of collections, various things as far as with education. I'm pointing over here at some of the things I brought down that I actually used in preparation for tonight's lecture. There's a lot of different things as far as education department. Goes back quite a ways, nearly back to 1863, of course, when West Virginia starts out. Map collections, which I take care of the map collections here at the archives. We have a lot. We have the finding aid that's actually on our website there. They're not all in there, and slowly but surely I am working on that to get those over to Joe. Joe actually puts them online, the director of the archives. Now, a lot of other collections, when you get over into, as far as, of course, our births, deaths, and marriages, a lot of those are actually online in the databases. Now, there's other things that are actually on the computer back in, many of you's been here, I'm kind of pointing toward the back where the public computers are. On the far right-hand computer, there's several things there. The voter cards of Logan County, McDowell County, Calhoun Calhoun County, I think some Cabell County, a couple counties there that these voter cards usually 40s, 50s, 60s, right in that time period. And they're interesting to look at in that, especially for the African American history, there's a lot of interesting ones to look at from McDowell County there, because those births are recorded in no other place that I know of. Because I've looked through a lot of the McDowell County, and when you look at these little counties down in the south there, McDowell County, Nego County, things, they're coal towns. And getting to the courthouse to record a birth, many of us that has done genealogy for a long period of time, nothing is more frustrating than looking for a birth or a death of somebody that it's just not recorded, and you kind of run up against the brick wall. I do that a lot even on my family. I live in Wayne County. There's some I know they exist, and I see their graves, but their births and their deaths are just not recorded anywhere. And that's one really nice thing about the voters card collection. McDowell County, if they were in a little coal town there, some of the little towns, War, Cucumber, and places like that, where these coal companies had towns, that the birth date and where they were born at is going to be on that voter card. That's definitely something to look at if you're interested in, when you have family from down that area. Let's see, some of the other collections I want to really quickly. Of course, our births, deaths, and marriages, a good portion of them are online. The thing to remember about births, deaths, and marriages, there's times when they started. Marriages started basically from the inception of the family. They wanted to know who was marrying who. If there was any questions later on as far as property and things like that, they had the names of the two people. There was the marriage part. 1853 rolls around, the state of Virginia comes out and says, you need to start keeping track of births and deaths. So the counties, not just the West Virginia counties, but also at that time Virginia, but also the counties over in the eastern part of the state. Now, here in West Virginia, courthouse like, say, Wayne County, if you get down to the far reaches of Wayne County, it's a good 35-mile trip on good roads that we have nowadays. Of course, 1842, those good roads did not exist. And if there was a birth in the middle of winter, sometimes it just didn't make it into the birth record book there in Wayne. Same way with deaths. Somebody dies in the middle of winter, and it's a 35-mile trip to the courthouse, and they're 89 years old. There's a good chance that somebody didn't make that trip over to the courthouse to actually have it reported. Now, 1917 rolls around. Of course, June 20th, 1863 rolls around. The state of Virginia comes out being, the state of West Virginia, or the state of Virginia. So West Virginia comes into being. Now, the state of West Virginia says, keep doing that, counties. Keep those books up. Of course, the same thing is still going on. The caveat to that is they live 35 miles from the courthouse, and it's the middle of winter. But things just didn't get recorded sometimes. Now, later on, you start having things like insurance policies. Motor vehicles are come about in reformed places where everybody can have a car. You start having things like workers' comp. Governor Hatfield, the development of workers' comp here in the state. 1917, the state of West Virginia says, okay, you need to start issuing a legal document that has some kind of legal bearing on this person was born on this day or this person died this day. Show us a legal document that says so-and-so died on this day for this insurance policy. You start having things like that people are a little bit more legally needing to show. Now, at this point, we're really having that as far as we're we're starting to see here at the archives for people with the Homeland Security and things like that. And we realize now, that birth certificate is something that somebody will get back and ask you about eventually, especially the older ladies. That's something when they're trying to get their license and they're having to show X amount of ID to get their driver's license. Something to just throw that in as something to kind of remember in the moment. This lecture tonight is kind of an introduction to something that we want to start doing in March. And what we're going to do is on the nights that are non-lecture nights, where there isn't some sort of event going on, which we actually will do this anytime for anybody when they come in from 9 to 5 or 9 to 8 on Thursdays. If there's something that you want to look at, we will bring it down for you to look at. They are your records. We will bring any of the collections and things. Now, if it's 50-some boxes, there is collections that are that size, and we do ask them that you give us a little warning, a couple days maybe. Say, I want to take a look at this collection, Logan County Coal Association collection. I'm looking for such and such. Give us a little bit of advance notice, and we'll have them down for you. But we will. I say this is on Thursday nights, but we will do that anytime. But on Thursday nights, so the nights that are not lecture nights, we will bring the collection down. Say, we'll bring down not necessarily prison records or anything like that. Those are a little bit on the secure side. I'll talk about them a little bit. Some of the other collections, such as Logan County, some of the things that's in the Logan County Coal Association. As far as UMW, there's some UMW records in there. There's some records on May 1 shootout things that bring down the top two and show you what they are. One thing I want to ask y'all, if you have any questions as I'm talking or anything, I kind of hope this is more of a discussion rather than me rambling on or anything. But if you have any questions or anything, feel free to ask and just get my attention, and I'll try to answer. There's, of course, the director, Joe Geiger, is in the back there. If I can't answer. For Dick House over here, if you have any questions that I can't answer, that they can answer, they'll be glad to. To get into kind of the way I've divided this in my mind, is you have basic genealogy and contextual genealogy. Of course, basic genealogy, what I handed out there, and what you got. Births, deaths, and marriages. Basic genealogy, somebody will purchase one of our family trees that has 1 million names. There's a million names that they can put on that. And kind of basic genealogy, birth, death, and marriage. And that's some events, where they're buried at, where they were born at, or something like that. Pictures, people will attach pictures to that kind of thing. Contextual genealogy, what was going on in that person's life from the time they were born to the time they were died. Of course, marriage during in there, that's a pretty major event. Say they were a school teacher, or say they were a coal miner. Is there any events in there that gives, that you would find here, especially in the archive, is there any events that you would find that would put their lives in context? And of course, collections here, there is a lot of things that can provide that context for your ancestors. And we'll talk about them.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
When you're talking about that, you're talking about what was going on during a person's life. That might be events that were going on, say, in Charleston, not what I was doing then, but what was going on then. That's what you're talking about.
To put their life into perspective and a context as far as like some of the political events that's going on. How many ancestors, or how many of y'all have ancestors that's named Robert E. Lee Mark or whatever here? that kind of puts their life into context. Grover Cleveland, I don't know how many ancestors I have that named Grover Cleveland, so I'm sure they probably call him Grover.
How about George Washington?
George Washington, I've got a great-grandmother that's married to George Washington McAllister and a George Washington Hatfield. Her sister married the George Washington Hatfield.
Especially when it comes to political things, what were your ancestors thinking? What were their political insight? And what was their political, a person is not going to name a child, to me, a person is not going to name a child after somebody that didn't like. And
I have an uncle named Champ Clark Theodore.
got many of my older cousins, Delano, who was he named after? Franklin was one. So, you can kind of get an idea, and it may be something to look into, especially with like the voter cards. If they're naming somebody after a particular political leader, look in the voter cards to see what their political leaning was. Basics, like I mentioned, basics are vital statistics, and a lot of those can come from a lot of different areas as far as databases, microfilm, books, and things like that. Sources, U.S. Census, county records, newspapers, and things. And I gave you go back to just a second. I gave you West Virginia Info Depot.org. That's a website as far as where newspapers are available throughout the state. There is a login and a password. Where some things are, there's a few newspapers from West Virginia on there. Of course, our collections in the microfilm is more authoritative as far as, more numerous as far as newspaper goes. We have a very large newspaper collection. I would, for something that's a big event that's going to be in a big newspaper, there's one thing as far as the West Virginia Info Depot. But if they lived in, like, say, Pendleton County, or one of the places where there was not a major newspaper that was published in that county, Wayne County. I use Wayne County a lot. I'm from Wayne County, but there's not a major newspaper there. Wayne County News is about it. Of course, you get the Huntington newspaper, but Wayne County newspaper published once a week. So as far as it being out there somewhere electronically, probably not going to happen. But we do have our microfilm though, and as far as all these weekly newspapers, it's going to be from the more rural areas of the state. Our newspaper collection in the microfilm is top notch. Now, as far as other sources, of course, this is our website now I'm talking about. Birth, deaths, marriage databases on our website. Those are things that you can look at that are electronic versions. Now, we do have subscriptions to Ancestry.com and Fold 3, the military version of Ancestry. Those are available here in the library, and whenever we're open, you're always welcome to come, and we'll help you as far as if you have questions or you're having problems accessing it or anything. We will definitely help you out on that. Those are some of the sources as far as electronic. Now, our microfilm sources, that's back in the bag, that has a lot of the same vital statistics, births, deaths, and marriages of the county books and things. Those are. This is the one that I use mostly. It's a basic family tree, very small, where you can carry some of the information down. And like I mentioned, this is a very basic genealogy. There's not a whole lot of room as far as contextual things right in. And context, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, telling the story of a person's life with the information beyond the Bible statistics. As far as media and things, there's a lot of media out types out there, microfilm things, sources. But when you start building that contextual part of a person's life, you're looking at land records, wills, voters' records, educational records and things that we have here. There's some other things that can start filling in on that person's life that you can't find here. Now, that led up to three people that I want to talk about, and this is building a contextual type genealogy for somebody, or telling a little bit more about their lives using some of our collections. Now, the first one that I'd like to talk about is Charles Kenneth Fleshman. Whenever I walk by that big statue out there, the coal miner standing there, like that, this is the guy I think about when I walk by that statue. He was the coal miner. When we talk about coal miners from West Virginia, this is the guy that pops into my mind every time, because coal was his life. Coal was some of his illnesses also. Coal was eventually when he died. I kind of call him Kenna more than Charles, his middle name Kenna. Born in Greenbrier County, October 10th, 1885. Of course, Greenbrier County over on the eastern part of the state. Some coal mines, a lot of limestone, that type of thing. His parents was Addison and Susan Fleshman. Now, I'm getting this information actually from, getting this information actually right here on the very bottom of this birth record. Has some information there as far as his father's name, his mother, and what his father did. His father wasn't a coal miner, but now Kenna ended up being a coal miner. I kind of had the ideal, and this is what I mentioned earlier about names. The congressman and later senator, youngest senator that the state ever had, was John Kenna. John Kenna was in office when Charles Kenna was born, or Charles Kenna Fleshman was born. So I'm kind of wondering if his parents, thought that, hey, I like this guy, and he's a Democrat. And when you look through the voters' records for Kanawha County, you see a lot of Kenna Fleshman's children in them are Democrats. So I'm kind of wondering if that, to put it kind of in context, what he would have been. Now, unfortunately, we don't have the voters' record for Kenna yet. But I kind of have this idea that maybe he's a Democrat. Census record, the 1900 census record. Can't really see it. Some of the census records are really tough to see. But this tells a little bit of information about Kenna and some of his family. I just wanted to put that up there as far as information. Now, the thing to remember on these censuses, this is kind of extra rather than talking about Charles Kenna. Up to 1840, they're head of the household. They're not going to have all the names of the children. They're going to have the head of the household. 1850 rolls around. That's pretty terrible, because when I look back at the 1790 census and I see some of my family, and you just see 4 males, 3 females, and you have no idea what they are. But now the head of the household. Now, of course, that changes. 1850 rolls around. They have the names of all in that household. Then further on from there, of course, the 1850 and the 1860 census also has the slave censuses. But now, the thing to remember, just a little extra information here, the censuses, I kind of get the ideal in some of them, especially in the holler. You have a guy walking along and he's talking to people and saying, you know, how many children do you have, blah, blah, blah. And he gets halfway up the holler and it's 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. And he gets to the house and he looks at the guy and says, you know, you have X amount of children? What about the next house on up the road? Who are they? And writes that down. How many children do they have? I think they have 5. I think it's 3 boys and 2 girls. I think their names are such and such. I think that's one thing that to be aware of in some of the more rural areas, and to explain some of the oddities we see in these censuses back in that time period. 1870, 1880 census, of course, the 1890 census we don't have that, but we do have the soldiers census, veterans census from 1890 for West Virginia. But I had this ideal that these guys, as they were going up the holler, they'd like, man, it's getting late, and you know, I've got to go all the way back to Fort Day or all the way back to Wayne, and it's going to be 2 hours getting back there. And who's up there? Tell me who's up there. And then they go on with the show from there. Now, getting back to Kenneth Fleshman here. And this, hopefully you can see it. I have Kenneth actually marked on the census. Now, by this time, he is a coal miner, and the house that he's in is a fellow by the name of John Amick. And as we can see, you may not be able to see it, but he's the superintendent of one of the shops there at the coal company. Of course, this is, you'll notice up there, it's Fayette County. Kenneth by this time has moved over into Fayette County, and that's the story behind a lot of these censuses, is they document as people were moving westward, and especially in West Virginia, as they're moving around, especially in the coal towns and things like that. But you'll notice he's in a household that is not his parents. He's actually a boarder in his household. And you'll notice right up, 2 names up from him is a daughter's name, or I'm sorry, it's Joseph Amick, is the head of the household there. But if you'll notice, the daughter's name is Maddie, and she's important in Kenneth's name and Kenneth's history because that becomes his wife later on. So we know that there's some connection. We notice connection as far as the coal miners, and then later on the connection where they actually get married. And I haven't found the marriage certificate yet, but we do know because of the death certificate, which I'll show you in a little bit. Oh, I'm sorry.
I can't see that. Can you just go like across just with his name, column by column, and say what that is, what that information they were collecting there?
Okay, and as you come across on the where I marked it there,
Yes.
okay, this is the names of the individuals. This is their relationship.
So does it say border?
It says born. He probably working in the same mines and needed a place to stay, and ended up being born, and later on became a son-in-law. Of course, this other information tells over in the personal descriptions, male, female, their skin color, age, marriage, whether they were single or whatever. You get on over and there's where people were born. This is how many children they have, how many children that are alive. Censuses were really interesting in that every time they did one, they would have a little bit different information. That they'd ask for a little bit different information. I think people probably like, man, why are they being so nosy? But we're really glad that they were nosy because it kind of tells us at that point some of the information about that person. Of course, where they were born, where their parents were born, whether they spoke English or some other language. You get down to coal fields and you start seeing Slavic, Italian, so many other, Russian, and McDowell County especially. You start seeing Mingo County, Logan County, and those coal counties. Now, on up north, you also see the same thing on up north. A lot of the coal mines and things like that, they will have a lot of different languages, and that tells you at that point, on the contextual side of it, if they're speaking Russian, you look over the immigration records, because they had to come here. They're in the census, they had to come here, somebody had to say, okay, where are you from? Are you going to be a citizen, or are you just passing through, whatever? Immigration records, we have a lot of them on microfilm back here. The counties have the originals. The really interesting thing about these immigration records, they have pictures with them. And so you get an idea of what one of your ancestors looked like at 20 years old. Of course, you get on over in here, what their occupation was. You see a lot of coal miners and things, it's coal mining country, right on the Tug River. Blacksmith, superintendent of coal mining. Then you get on over, do you own your home? Education, can you read, can you write? This will answer some of the things as far as, if you have any family diaries or anything you see on here that they can write. That explains it. If you don't see anything like that, that may be one of the things you see in some of the records, especially in the old deeds and things, signed with an X. Maybe real good.
Although I will have to say that I found in a will for my great-great-grandfather, X signed by X. And I thought, oh, the poor man never learned how to read and write. And then we went to another source and found out he had been shot in the hand during the Civil War. And I thought, well, maybe he could read and write, he just couldn't write anymore.
Could very well be that. It's pretty amazing sometimes when you look through some of these records and people that were obviously businessmen and knew business and things. We talk about Deb Lance Hatfield. I did a lot of research on the Hatfield family. Deb Lance Hatfield was illiterate, but yet he is worth quite a bit of money. And all of his deeds and things are signed by X. Now, whether, it doesn't say that he wasn't intelligent, it just said couldn't read or write. Get on over to 1920. Kenneth lives over in Fayette County. By this time, him and Maddie are married, and they have several children. And this census is very similar to the 1910 census that you just saw, as far as same basic information and things. So some of them didn't change a whole lot. Some of them changed quite a bit. The 1880 census, name, their description of whether they were white, age, and that was about it. There wasn't a whole lot of other things, where they were from and things like that, but it didn't go in anywhere quite this kind of aspect for this kind of information. Okay. Now, 1930, we see him over in Kanawha County, and this is where I mentioned earlier about they're traveling. They're moving a little bit further west, out of Fayette County, over into Kanawha County. Lives over in Tad, not very many miles from here, up Kansas Creek. Not very far at all. Worked in the mines. That was his big thing. He worked in the mines, loaded coal at this time, which by this time he's 44 years old, and has worked in the mines quite a bit.
If you didn't know where Tad was, how would you find that out?
Glad you asked. We have a ton of maps back here, as far as county maps and things like that. Now we also have the West Virginia Gazetteer, and what that is, it goes through and it has all these towns, like towns that had post office and things like that. And it has a little description of where they were as far as, what county they were in, post office, what. Sometimes they have a little bit more description on some of. We have some other books that tell us as far as West Virginia town names and things, who they were named after and things. A lot of these towns were named after people. But we do have a lot of as far as maps and things though, and the gazetteers. I look at some of them gazetteers and I'm like, some of the towns in the gazetteer, and I'm like, wow, that town no longer exists, and back then it was quite a large town. He's down here on the bottom. I do want to point out one thing. If you'll notice, how's his name spelled back there? F-L-E-I-S-H-M-A-N. And it's given C-K. Fleshman. He used, and again, I think this is the case of somebody, the clerk or whoever was taking this, they're not really asking, okay, what's your name? Okay, and they write it down, and they don't necessarily ask them, can you spell that for me? They kind of give. That's one thing to remember on any of the, like in our databases and on Ancestry and things like that. It's one thing to remember on these is that the name. There's going to be some variations in the names and the way you search, especially on our databases, the way you search for these names. If it's a really strange name like this, be aware that you need to look at more than just one spelling of that name.
Somebody left an S off years ago, and Eggleston became Eggleton.
Yep.
In our family tree.
This just has as children. By that time, they had several children, and this gives them an idea on that. When you start documenting a person, as far as some of the things within their life, some of the things that you can look at is military records. This, in particular, is the World War I draft registration, which we have on microfilm back here. There is an electronic version, but I like to use the microfilm because it's a little bit better quality as far as when you're looking at the names and things, it's not as blurry and things. It was of course, here with Kenna, you can see where he's working at, and of course there's his wife's name on it. That way you can kind of double check to make sure that it's the person that you're actually looking for, especially when it starts having information about their wife or who their mother was and things. There'll be some information here that you can actually look at and be able to double check yourself on that. Sid Hatfield down in Matewan. There was always a big controversy over when he was born. Sid Hatfield filled out one of these, and then he signed it. We have his signature there. We know that it's his signature because one of our other collections upstairs, there was they filled out a petition. They petitioned the court saying, we want such and such looked at down in Eagle County. And Sid Hatfield's signature is right there on the petition. And it's the same as what his World War I draft registration is. So there's some things there that you can take a look at and double check yourself on some things.
So, like Kenner, it says Kenner there,
Mm-hmm.
not Kenna. So you get a lot of that?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Kenner, somebody just kind of slurs their name a little bit. What? Kenner. Or Kenna, didn't get the A, or had a little bit of twang to his voice, and sounds like Kenner. World War II. This is the draft registration for World War II. The older men, because at that time they was like, now we're going to have to take everybody, and so we need to register. By this time, Kenna was getting up in years. In the 40s, he's up in his 50s. And so what they were doing is they were actually had a draft registration for the older fellows, just in case things went bad and they had to have more men, and they'd be able to draft the older fellows. This tells a little bit about him, where he was working at a time. And actually gives the location of the mine that he was working at, the Hatfield Camel Creek Coal Company in Brinsford, here in Kanawha County. Just a little bit of a description about him. Now this is something that has come to us in recent years, and this tells a little bit more. This is his actual mining certificate here. It tells a little bit more information, and this is very similar to what the voters' cards have as far as information about the person. It tells a little bit about him, how many years he's worked in the mines, how many years he's worked in coal mines in West Virginia, 33 years. Total experience in the coal mines, 35 years. So there's a couple years there that didn't work in West Virginia. I often wonder where he worked at. Did he work in Ohio? Did he work in Virginia? There may be some information out there on him there.
That has his social security number on that. When did they stop allowing that to be? I'm guessing this is public information.
Yep. Since he's been dead since 44, this is actually one of the earlier, as far as but yeah, information on people that is alive nowadays. You will not see the social security number, and when we process these, you will not. Eventually, you will not see the social security number on that. Okay. Now, this is a little bit. This is some information on him from when he was a younger man, and this is actually a medical record from the McKendree Hospital over in Fayette County. Now, here you'll notice that his the diagnosis was foreign body in the ear. That's a little bit about what he had was coal dust in his ear. My father was a coal miner, and I can always remember every so often my mom would have to clean his ears out because coal dust is really dry. And when it gets in contact with the wax in your ears, it forms a big plug. And if it goes on too long, you have to go to the doctor and have basically choked out. Now, just right down below foreign body, you'll notice that there's some diseases there that he had when the doctor's sitting there writing this down, saying, what's some of the sicknesses that you've had? And he goes through and he says, I had smallpox in 1909, had typhoid fever in 1906, had pneumonia in 1910, had influenza in 1919. Of course, that's the 1918 influenza. It's interesting to note that on all of these here, we have vaccinations for all of them now. Thank goodness. And we have effective medical treatment. Kenna, to me, is a survivor, a very definite survivor. Those are some major diseases without really effective medical treatment back in that time. 1920 is when he said. McKendree, the hospital there in McKendree, there was 3 hospitals in 1899. The state said, we're going to have 3 hospitals that treats miners and railroaders. But 1899, the state says, no, let's have these hospitals. And we do have the books, 2 of the books from this particular hospital. And it does have indexes and if you have any ancestors or anything from Fayette County, possibility they may be in there if they got sick and they ended up going to the hospital. Now these hospitals, unfortunately we don't have the books for the one that is down in Welch, which was hospital number 1, or the one that was up at Fairmont, which is Miners Hospital number 3. Now, the hospital down in Welch, the first director of it was Henry B. Hatfield. Later became governor, later became senator from West Virginia. But he was the first director of hospital number 1. But now, these hospitals, especially McKendree Hospital here, McKendree Hospital lasts from 1901 up to 1941. There's several articles about it, and they're very interesting in Golden Seal. There's a couple articles from some of the nurses, because these were hospitals that treated miners, and And they also took in pay patients, and we see some of that in this particular collection here.
Do you have records from other hospitals?
Unfortunately, we don't have them from McHenry's one of the major ones. There's a few others, Weston, which is, of course, mental hospital. Some of the other hospitals that were state related, we have some information about. We have information on the state hospitals as far as who were directors and what their budgets were and things like that. But this is one of the unique ones in that it actually has people in it. The reflection of it is actually about the patients themselves. This is actually how I came about with Kenna actually seeing the name for the first time. I was looking through for a patron had written a research request and was looking for information on one of her ancestors that had been in this hospital, and I just happened all the diagnoses that he told the doctor about, four really potentially fatal diseases. I was looking at that and I'm like, my gosh, that guy went through a whole lot there before he. Now no, this is the certificate of death, this is what you would see on our database here on the website. This is the certificate for his wife. His wife died of basically a heart attack. You'll see that over on the far right-hand side. And these certificates tell a little bit about a person as far as where they were from, possibly their parents and things like that. Now, we get to the thing that actually this is another collection that we have. Department of Mines, Director's Correspondence, fatal accident reports, which this is what this actually is. There is a earlier collection that covers up to 1932, and this is a collection that covers beyond that. This is the collection that Ken is actually in until he got killed in the coal mines. What these fatal accident reports tells what happened to him. Kenna was actually pinned in one of the shuttle cars rolled down. He got pinned against the side. And had a lot of internal injuries. He lasted for a couple days, and then he passed away. And this tells about what happened to him. This is the actual report telling what happened, who was with him when it happened. Then you get into this particular one. And this one gives a little bit more information about the person. Any of the fatal mine reports and things that you look at are going to have this kind of information. Sometimes they'll have was married, had 3 kids. Married, had X amount of children, divorced or widowed or something like that. It'll have that kind of information. And it'll tell if they had like insurance policies or that kind of information on them. This one tells about what happened to him. It's basically what was the facts behind it all. Kenna died about a year after his wife passed away.
How old was he? How old was he?
58, I believe it was. Yeah, he wasn't 58 years old. A little bit more information later. These things, the earlier ones, 1919 ones, and them are usually just one page. They don't have a whole lot more information about it. But the later ones have a little bit more information. Can't see this very well, but this is, to me, this is when something happens, people have to be notified, and that's what the sheet is here, is who was called when this happened. And this is his certificate of death. This came from our website here. Tell us a little bit about little bit about him as far as his parents and things like that, and what he died of. Fractured pelvis, ruptured urethra, fractured wrist. He's pretty banged up. This is the county record part of it. Now, you have a county record, and then you have a certificate. After 1917, started issuing certificates. Before that, it would have just been the county death record. And I'll just really quickly show you. This is something that, of course, after somebody dies that has property, which after Maddie and Kenna died, they didn't have a will in particular. They were just in the state. The state came through and said, okay, we're going to have to appoint some commissioners to actually do something with their property and things. And there's a few things in their property that I want to point out real quick. Okay, this tells the information. This is from the microfilm. This tells the information as far as where you will find what they did with their property and things. This is, as I mentioned, this is from the microfilm here in Kanawha County. The will book, where they actually, where you have an index that tells all this where this information is, and this is where you go to when they start telling the information. Now, the interesting thing about Maddie and Kenna's relationship, and this is the context, I guess, of how they were with each other. The property, the real estate, and the houses and things was in Maddie's name. The deeds and things were. And, of course, the other property was probably in Kenna's name, but when we look through the deed books and things, Maddie was the one that was in Maddie's name. So I'm not sure what was the reason. Any of the, if there's any family members out there or they watch this video on YouTube, I wish they would contact me because I would like to know a little bit more about them. It's just something that kind of piqued my interest there. But this is something that, of course, real estate and things, giving the values of real estate. Telling a little bit about their children, who their dependents were. And then you get over to Kenna's part of the will. At this point, this is when you start seeing what they had. They had a gas range, had 2 hogs, cannon creeks, and the really interesting thing is this portion right here. I hope you can see it. A defense bond from January 1942. That was for $1,000. Kenna was making about $50 a week, and he had several children. So they managed, of course, World War II's on, very patriotic. He had 2 sons that was in the military, so very patriotic. This tells a little bit more as far as some of the bank accounts, some of the banking information and things. Tells a little bit more about their children and things. Judiciary records, and all this is basically who was taking care of these records, who was the person that was administering some of these. And this is going to be true even in early years and things like that. You will have administrators, you will have estates that are broken up and things. The administrators will sometimes tell you, relationships between the deceased and the administrator. Son-in-laws appointed as administrators and things like that. So there's something to, even in the early records, is to look at the names and see if there's any relationship between them. And there's something else here that I'd like to point out. One son was in the Navy, one son was in the Army, and he had 2 daughters. Him and Maddie had 2 daughters, and their address is given as Norfolk, Virginia. What were they doing? They were Rosie the Riveters, I would say. So they were out in Norfolk, probably maybe it went before, and so they were out in Norfolk, probably working in the shipyard. When you see something like that as far as Norfolk or some of the towns like that during World War II, it's probably what they were doing. this is just another sheet of that. This is her obituary when she died. Of course, her daughters were out in Norfolk by that time. Then later on, when Jenna died, this is his obituary. These are obituaries from our newspaper collection, Charleston Gazette. All right. Now, the next person I'd like to talk about, and Betty Rivard, who's sitting right there. One of the pictures, I actually credit her having that picture in the book that actually got me started on Walter Marion Crickland. Of course, he is a soldier and he's a motorcyclist too. Okay, Betty's book, before I forget it, it's New Deal Photographs of West Virginia, 1934 to 1943. If you're interested in this. Now, I don't know if this guy realized that he was kind of famous. This picture and several other pictures were actually taken down in Omar, West Virginia, down in Logan County. The photographer during of course, a lot of people were out of work and things, and one of the photographers that was actually came down here through some of the programs to help, out of work photographers was Ben Shan. Ben Shan came down to Omar, and he took a series of pictures, which this guy is who I'm going to talk about. That's Walter Marion Crickland. There were several pictures taken of that. You can kind of get a side view of Walter there sitting on it, but also his motorcycle, 1931 Harley Davidson. Now, something about this picture that I would like to point out. Of course, has anybody been down to Logan County? You ever been down to it? This is Omar. It's one of the little coal mining towns. There's several things going on in this picture, and that over in here you can see a tower right above this gentleman that's around. That's the water tower for one of the big sawmills from the Paytona Lumber Company. And one of our collections, in our map collection, one of the collections is fire insurance drawings of different sawmills. And if anybody's interested in sawmills and things like that, Cass, Paytona Lumber Company, Swandale, all those mills, there's drawings here in our map collection that actually shows these sawmills.
What's the date? What dates is it?
Oh, this picture here is 1935.
But I mean the insurance pictures.
The insurance picture for that particular mill there is 1927. Most of those drawings are in the 20s.
Are those the Sanborn? Are those the Sanborn?
Yep.
No.
Yeah, these are the just a second, I'll get more information about that. Now these were through the West Virginia Inspections Bureau for fire insurance drawings. So there's a series of basically drawings, but they are maps to a certain extent. That's what I mean about the context, where these people were living, what was going on around them. If you have a picture of an ancestor and what some of the things that you can pull out, especially if you know the date of that picture, 1935. Of course, 1935, that sawmill had been out of business as a Paytona Lumber Company, but there was a couple of other companies that came in there and saw some of the timber that was remaining. Of course, around this area here, Omar, you had a lot of coal companies. It was coal country. Had a lot of coal companies were doing business down there. West Virginia Coal and Coke, mines everywhere, and we have some maps that show some of those mines. But they pulled a lot of coal out of that area, and these pictures will give you an idea as far as that there was a lot of people down in that area. A lot of people of different races also. different ethnic. Guy on the right there, probably Italian, or Slavic or something. He's probably one of the coal miners come down there and getting script for whatever that day. Yeah. One thing I do want to point out when you go back to this picture here, see that license plate number, 239? That's how we can tell who is sitting on that motorcycle. That license plate number was registered to Walter Crickman. Now we have go back over here, we have a couple of collections that actually are listings of these license plates, who vehicle registrations were issued to. We have some people come in occasionally and say, I've got this license plate here that I bought on eBay. Who had it? And we can take a look at it and we can go through the books and say, well, so-and-so had that license plate. And Walter Crickman, of course, I'll show you that up here. Walter Crickman is where the little yellow thing there. Lived in Omar. I'll tell you the information there. Lived in Omar, had a Harley Davidson in 1931. It was a 31 GL. I wish I had about 10 of them. I'd be a rich guy. But this particular motorcycle, this gives you an idea a little bit more about the motorcycle. Originally sold for $340. Is the high performance Harley Davidson. That gives you a little context about what kind of bike he liked to ride. He liked to ride the souped up one. There's some other ones there. One's a sidecar, and the other one's just one of the other ones. But this was actually to give you an idea as far as who Walter Crickman was. He was born down in McDowell County, down in a little town called Kyle. October 9th, 1905 is when he was born. So he's before birth certificates. He's actually still in the county birth records. Yep. This picture here, I want to point out Henry Crickman, who is Walter Crickman's father. This guy right here, he's third from the left here. This was a picture that was from the Centennial Program of the City of Logan. We have it back over on the shelves here. And there's a couple people that I'd like to point out in here. The photo was courtesy of Johnny Moscow. He's this guy right on the end here. 1920 in our motor vehicle books. He lived down in Logan County, had a Dodge Roadster. So he liked a little bit of sporty car too. Now, the other guy that I'd like to point out is this guy right here. That's Tennis Hatfield. That's Devil Lance's son. These are the guys who were around. Now, Walter Crickman was one of them kind of guys that he was how do I put this? He was complicated. He had several brothers and sisters. His father worked in the mines. After the 1920 census, after the 1910 census, his father's no longer in the census records with his mother. They got a divorce. His father, Henry Crickman, ends up going up into the Ohio River country, over in Brooke County, over in that area, and ends up marrying a girl and bringing her back down to Logan County. Now, they started out, originally they were from down North Carolina, and they came up into West Virginia and coal mining. The money from mining and things was calling to them, and so you can see that western movement through the census records of them coming on up into West Virginia.
Okay, that's not on this law is. How would you know that they got divorced and that he went someplace else? I'm not talking about just this one person, but the assumption would be that Dad died if he was listed with Mom as head of household, right?
the way I found on this particular one is when I went through our databases on the marriages, it's like, I'm gonna look for Crickmans, because I know that 1920 census, Henry is not in there. He's in the 1910 census. And what happened to Henry? And when I went through the marriage database, I found a marriage for Henry Crickman, 1924 in Cook County. So at that point I was like, I know what's happened there. Marriage certificate says they're divorced, he is divorced. Actually it gives his age. His age is a little bit off. His age is a couple years off. And I wonder if the clerk just didn't hear it, or, hey, I look like I'm 40 years old rather than 49 years old. Something along those lines. But something happened there, because she's listed, Walter's mother is listed as the head of the household, and Walter's in that household, but Henry's no longer there, and it's like, well, he didn't die, because see him later on, and we do see him in the censuses later on with Nanny Crickman. So we know that there had to have been somewhere along the line he got married to somebody.
So there's no line across there though for like single, divorced, widow, that type thing?
In some of the censuses there is.
In some of the census, there is a place for married, widowed, or.
Yeah. Some of them do, some of them record.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
that appears to just say married or single all up and down, but an awful lot, that column quite often says widow.
I think what happened here with Henry is they probably separated, because at this point, Amanda, in this column right here, is saying she's still married. But sometime between 1920 and 1924, there was a divorce there, because Henry's getting married to a girl in Brooke County. But I think they may have still been married at this point, but they probably like, I'm out of here, or I'm moving up to Ohio River or something like that. Of course, this is the last time we see Walter in the household with either of his parents, because next year he's married also. He marries his first wife. Of course, this is the marriage certificate I was mentioning. It's actually the top part here. Henry Crickman and Nanny Thomas. It tells where he's from originally in North Carolina and where he had been living at, Logan County. So it gives you some information there that you can determine that, yeah, that's the same Henry that was down in Logan County. This, when Henry dies, 1957, he is 83 years old. Now this is Walter's father. It tells a little bit of information as far as from North Carolina. And as I mentioned on names, even in the older documents, he gives his wife's name as Nanny. There's a typo or something there, so that's something to be aware of when you're looking through these records. Her name was actually Nanny, but that's something to be aware of, even in later ages, that there can be some misspellings. 1930 rolls around. And this demonstrates how much change can happen between these censuses and why you need to look at birth record. And it's even more so when you get back in the ages of 1850, 1860, 1870, those censuses, because there was no medical care basically. And up in this time period, you had some medical care that would enable you to live a little bit longer. But this gives you an idea though, as far as how much change can happen between these censuses. Walter's been married twice already in that 10-year period. This is the second wife, Ida, stepdaughter. So that always be aware that between censuses there can be a lot of change. This is the first of four marriages. This is who he had the two children by. his son that died in 1969, Walter Richard Crickman. He had a daughter that died earlier, when she was about 8 years old. This marriage record is to his second wife, Ida Rice. And this is a little information there. In the very bottom of this, Ida R. Crickman versus Walter Crickman, plaintiff was granted a divorce. If you notice where this is from, Portsmouth Times, Portsmouth, Ohio. So sometimes you have to kind of have an idea that some of these events did not happen just where they lived at or where you would think they would live at. It could have happened somewhere out there. And I just happened to come across this in the West Virginia Info Depot.
This is what I was gonna ask where you found that.
Yep, West Virginia Info Depot. Library of Congress has many of the newspapers, not necessarily West Virginia newspapers, but Ohio newspapers, Kentucky newspapers, what little bit there is on the eastern side of Kentucky, but especially the Ohio and those newspapers. There's tons of newspapers on Library of Congress's website. And the search, you'll have fun searching. Ohio newspapers go back quite a ways. 1804, I believe, was when Ohio, and they had newspapers from day one, just about it.
I can tell you that when you're searching, even if you say, okay, my guy was from Wayne County, and there are no Wayne County newspapers in some of these databases, so it's no good for me to search. Don't bet on that. In Kentucky, I had a guy in a very rural county. He died. We had conflicting stories about whether he was struck by lightning or fell from a barn or both. And it was the year before Kentucky had their statewide death records. I checked his county newspapers. They didn't exist on microfilm. I couldn't find anything then. I checked the next county over where his family was from. Didn't find anything there. Long shot, years later, I was looking at a database about 4 counties away, and it was Lexington, Kentucky. And I searched for this family, and it was in this other family was in Lexington. And just before I quit, I thought, well, let me stick this last name in. And there were 5 things that came up, and one of them was a headline that says, Reuben Cordray dies from a fall in a barn. So you just don't know. It was counties away in a big story, or a several paragraph story.
Civil War, as far as Ohio newspapers, what was going on in West Virginia. Now, a lot of the units that were fighting in West Virginia, the northern units, a lot of them were from Ohio. And a lot of these guys were writing, hey, this is what's going on in West Virginia. You know, it's all hills, and I feel like I've made one uphill for the last 10 years. There's a lot of those kind of stories and things in the Ohio newspapers, because these guys were writing back and saying, Mom, this is what I'm going through. And a lot of those stories ended up in the Ohio newspapers. It's one resource, Library of Congress and things. Of course, our newspapers here in the microfilm, Wheeling newspaper was talking about things going on down in the southern part of the state, talking about things going on in this part of the state during the Civil War. So a lot of those, you can get a lot of information from that. And I get amazed every time I look through even the later newspapers. Doddridge County, 1905, and in that time period, they have little things, news from West Virginia, and it'll have little blurbs about, this was going on down in McDowell County, or going on down in Mercer County, or they were kind of cut and paste type thing where somebody would send, the news lines would send something in and they'd type it up, put it in the newspaper for filling. Now, third marriage of Walter. He didn't have any children by the last 3 wives. He had the 2 by the first wife, and that was it. Of course, these marriage records, they're going to tell a little bit about that person. Of course, it shows him as divorced, and of course, the new wife at that point was single. This is marriage to his 4th wife, Mary McNeely. This is his final wife. This is the death certificate of him, and it looks like her name is Silver, but it's Sylvia, his first wife. It tells a little bit about the little girl that died. She was 8 years old in 1930. And I kind of threw this in there just to remind that the disease is very difficult. Here's from the U.S. National Archives website. It tells a little bit about his military. Now, he went in just a couple months after Pearl Harbor, March of 1942. A couple months after Pearl Harbor. He was about 38 years old, so he was getting up there in years. He was not a young guy, but he had been married a couple times. He didn't have anything, any entanglements or anything. He went in and noticed down on the bottom on civilian occupations, skilled mechanics and repairmen. Now, online and some of his family things that I have found, they noted that he had been in North Africa and had been a mechanic in the army and things. When you look at the old motorcycles, the old Harleys and the old Indians and things, if you weren't a mechanic, you didn't ride very much. So that kind of gives you an idea about it.
Can you talk for just a minute about which National Archives records are online? Like, is it just military records, or are there also
National Archives, as far as their records go, anything that deals with a person, as far as their files go, I think that's something that you want to have to actually write in and say, I'm a family member of so-and-so, and I'd like a copy of the service record or something. Now, a lot of the service records and things of World War II, and a lot of them was damaged, or so they say, in the big fire out in St. Louis. Now, the Civil War service records, that's a little bit different story, in that those are stored out in Washington, and if you do request, that's like $75 for a request. And you're going to get a mixed bag on the records for something like that. Some of them's going to have 150 pages. They will have affidavits from people that knew them, their children, statements from their wives, and things like that. Some of them will have a lot. Some of them will have a couple pages. But the Civil War service records, they're pretty. If you have a Union. Not Confederate, just the Union part. If you have an ancestor that was in one of the Union units, that may be something that you want to look at, because they're going to say, this was the children that we had, and things like that. And those affidavits would be pretty handy for you.
So did you have to request that?
Yeah, this was online. This was just the basic. Ancestry has something similar to this. Ancestry also has any of their dependents and things, like if they were getting money or anything, when they died, they were notified that, and it would have that same basic information.
Are there Confederate records anywhere?
Service records, no. Not I'm aware of now. We do have the National Archives, like the muster lists and things like that, like the muster cards and things. We do have those, but as far as when I say no, I shouldn't probably not have been as final as that. But there is sometimes they'll have information in there, like my ancestor who fought in the 8th Virginia Cavalry. There was some records in there that had requested reimbursement for a horse that he had provided and had died during service and things, and that particular record was in there.
Now, what's muster service or muster card? Whatever, I don't know what that is.
Now, the muster cards, West Virginia and the Union, of course, the Confederates, they didn't have those, but the Union troops and the Union militias and things, around about adjutant general came out and said, you know, let's make these cards for, that's what you're seeing a lot on the microphone, is let's make these cards that told where they were when these musters were done. And these records were taken from the big muster list and things for the militias, muster list for the regiments and things. And they're basically 1890s view in these muster reports of where they were at that time. The present, not present, sick, and those kind of
That's
things.
unique, not.
You know,
Yeah.
better just,
Hmm.
I found some like.
Mhm. Yeah, we do have the Confederate and the National Archives. Those are muster cards because there is muster lists that exist. Not all the records for the South was lost, and they did have musters and things like that. And those cards are on our phone also.
Would they have had like date of birth, date of death, anything like, what would have been on it? People, just names?
On a Civil War muster card, going to be the name, the unit that they were in. If it was their enlistment, the muster card from when they first enlisted, then it'll have that this person was 25 years old, from Cabell County, Virginia, that kind of. That's about as far as they go. They have the unit, like the 8th Virginia Cavalry, and the company, like Company I or something like that. They don't go really in depth as far as, who was your next of kin, who was your parents.
You might find like a whole bunch of different muster cards. The first one, like you said, won't have much. The second one might list 3 different times that they were listed in a muster. One on a muster list, and it'll say they were at Carnifax Ferry or wherever that they were. And then when they muster out, it'll list usually everything. Combine all those cards and it'll have a list of everywhere they were and if they got paid for their horse or if they got so many uniforms or boots or whatever.
It's interesting, socks, pairs of socks. Like I mentioned, Ancestry.com's got something similar. We noticed that it got out when he went in March of 1942 and got out in October of 45. But he did spend just about the entire war. Died in 1983. Gives you that information. When he does pass away, this is the obituary. It tells by this time his natural children had all passed away. And this is in the Logan banner. We have the Logan banner on microphone back here. Okay, this is my final person to talk about. Anna Marie Cocker. She's a teacher down in Wayne County. Born in February of 1932, died just a couple years ago, May of 2013. This actually went in. And since she's the one that I know the most about as far as a teacher, but I learned a lot about her and some of the collections that we had. I was able to look through and say, wow, there is something that I didn't know about her. She had, this picture in particular was actually from the 1954 Crown High School yearbook. We do have the yearbook collection. A lot of different high schools, a lot of different colleges. Get to see what your parents looked like when they were young. Or you get to see what your aunt looked like when she was young. Annie Hockley, she had gotten out of school. Well, she got married, quit going to school for a little while, and went back to school. Her sister, a couple of years younger than her, she went back to school to be with her sister in school. When she got out of school, went to Marshall College at that time. Later became Marshall University, got her teacher's degree, and later on went to Marshall and got a master's degree, and also University of Virginia. She never did have any children or anything, so she spent a lot of time. She loved reading, loved going to college. And of course,
Did you ever figure out the meaning of those things below her name?
nicknamed Sandy. Her hair was light, kind of like mine. They were saying, hey, no, this is the senior class. Whenever they had these, like the class wheel and things like that, they had under their pictures, their favorite sayings and things like that. And you see that in a lot of the yearbooks, even in college yearbooks, you'll see some of that. Now she started out in a little school, Walnut Grove, down in Wayne County. Later on went to Crum High School. Then later on in Tulsa High School. Of course, the documents I'm going to show you, they're actually state documents that are in the collection on the third floor. And these are available. This is what you would see online. Like, say you just want to see the educational directory of one of your ancestors that had taught in 1920. And like, hey, I wonder where they taught at. This is what you'd see when you go to our website and you start going through, just like, I'll go to state documents, education, Department of Education things will be state documents. And this is the page that you're going to see, and this is going to give you the information. And that gives you the years and things that are available in that collection. The call numbers, whenever you come, say, hey, this is what I want to look at is in this particular collection. This is actually the front cover of one of these books here. You can see it. This tells about her first school. And if you have an ancestor that's been a teacher and you're wondering what kind of school they taught in, Walnut Grove was on a rural route. It's up in the middle of nowhere. Crum is the nearest school, and what grades they taught, 1 through 8, and there was 87 students, and it tells what the teachers taught. There's 2 other teachers there besides her 3-room school rather than the 1-room school. But when you go back into the 1920, some of the earlier ones, go back to the picture. Go back into some of these earlier ones, 1902 things, you see the 1-room school. One teacher has 36 students, and they had like a class 1 certificate or something like that. And class 1 certificate a little bit higher, class 3, of course, a little bit lower. Class 1, they had a little bit more training and things. That'll tell you a little bit more about your ancestors. This is another one. This is when she actually started teaching over in Crum at the high school. This tells a little bit about what. These are later on records, 60, 61, up in that time period. We started telling a little bit more about as far as school and things. And this is telling what she actually taught, and all the teachers. They just had things after their names as far as what they were teaching. Later on, she taught at Tulsa, and she retired. And she was a lifelong school teacher. She liked to teach.
What years was she at Crum?
She was at Crum 60, 61 school year up to 1988.
I need to talk to you later.
Later. As I mentioned, these are state documents. This is what you're going to see when you go to anything that is state document. Annual reports for any of the government from 1863 on. A lot of these annual reports will have little tidbits of information, kind of like looking for a needle in a haystack. But there is some things in there. I just wanted to show you some of these with the educational. State Superintendent of Free Schools, and this is the one that ended in 1900. Now, the county superintendent for Gilmer County, he makes some comments. Of course, he tells, his districts, how many students was in his district and things. Like I said, these go back 1863, some of it, and you go over into the other, talk about that other collection. They divided this out in around 1902 or so. They started having the directories and things like that, and tell a little bit about the teachers and things. But the annual reports told a little bit more about the. Now, what I was going to mention here is that the school superintendent, I don't know if y'all can see all of it or not. I did not get to visit all of the schools in the county on account of smallpox. But I visited some of the same ones twice before the smallpox broke out. I would have visited them all in plenty of time if it had not been for the scourge and made several extra visits. Of course, with smallpox, children that are young and in school and things, children under 5 years old, it's pretty deadly. About 30% fatality on it, depending on different types of smallpox. And this was something that you can look at in some of the death records. Different types of smallpox. Now, there's been a vaccination for smallpox since the late 1700s. Now, you'll see throughout our death records and things, some of the things as far as these diseases go, and to get an idea of what some of your ancestors was facing. Now, like smallpox, there's several different types. Hemorrhagic smallpox. Basically, a person, when they have smallpox, it's like a burn. All the fluid is going into these blisters, and they end up dehydrated. Well, if you don't have any access to IV fluids or anything like that, you're going to die. And this particular, with smallpox, the hemorrhagic, over 90% fatalities in that. So, 1900, the school superintendent was talking about going out to these schools and saying, man, there's a big epidemic of smallpox, which we don't think of smallpox anymore, but thank goodness. It's horrible nowadays. But, this was another one of the 1881, 1882. And to show you how some of our collections, you can find some information that pins down some things. The guy's name that I have in Logan County here, as I mentioned, I'm kind of the Hatfield McCoy enthusiast. Now, this guy's name over here that I got marked was Charles C. Carpenter. Now, when the feud breaks out and the 3 McCoy boys are shot, Coleman Hatfield in his book, he says that Charlie Carpenter was the one guy when they were talking about what we're going to do with the 3 McCoy boys. Said Charlie Carpenter was the school teacher from May 1. Said he said we'll swear everybody to an oath of silence, and everybody will sign a document saying they won't say anything about it. The only place I have found Charlie Carpenter's name is in this annual report. So he did exist. Coleman wasn't just pulling something out of thin air. He was talking about an actual person, and there he is. So it kind of, our collections there's very many things you can take a look at in the collection. Any other questions?
I have a couple questions, possibly beyond the scope of your presentation. I have sort of wandered through genealogy study of my family blindly for the last 4 or 5 years without any real direction. And I will work on it, then I'll get tired and I'll put it in a box. And I'll get it out then 6 months later and get started again. And how reliable and how does Ancestry.com generate their database?
The thing you're looking at in Ancestry.com, as far as census records and things like that, they're taken from the microfilm. They have somebody sit down and actually go through the microfilm. And they're sitting there and they're transcribing heads of households. Now, the thing to remember on transcription, especially if the smudge page or it's really difficult to read the writing, they're giving a subjective look at that name. They're saying, well, that's what it looks like to me. And that's one thing that you have to keep in mind, which if I know somebody is from an area, and this is the way I approach the census, if I know somebody is from, say, Wayne County, I go page by page, and my gosh, it is painstaking sometimes, but sometimes you'll have to go page by page, name by name. Thankfully, some of the counties are not quite that big, and you can do that, but not like you get in Kanawha County. But that's one thing to be aware with Ancestry, is that Ancestry.com is that it's transcription, and somebody had, and we have that even in our databases. The names are tough, and whenever we come across a name that we're not sure of, we'll ask each other, or some that are more expert at it, and we'll look at it and say, well, it's got to be that. And we do get corrections, and we do corrections all the time in our databases, just to make sure that we do have it as correct as we can get. And Ancestry, though, is that's something that you're going to run across in Ancestry.com is, the names the spellings and things like that, and the writing and things is going to be. I hope I answered your question.
How does one validate information pre to West Virginia becoming a state, possibly with an ancestor that was in Tennessee? Is there a cross-reference? Go back into the early 1700s.
Those are.
It just gets, I get very frustrated because it becomes a guessing game then. Yeah. And I'm a person that likes to validate the accuracy of something. I've heard people say, oh, I went online last night and found my ancestors all the way back in England. Right? Yeah. It's, I don't think it's that easy.
No, it's not that easy. And I would question, personally, I would question if there's not a listing of primary documents stating that you have to question it if there's not documents. Where do you get that information from? Now, anything that is real early like that, it's sparse. You're looking at land grants. Of course, birth records and death records that's not going to exist.
Right.
Some families have Bibles and things like that do have these. But when you get back that far, you're looking at land grants, you're looking at land records, you're looking at wills and things like that.
How does anyone then validate the accuracy of their studies when you get back, especially in rural areas? All of my ancestors were rural farmers.
Thank you.
And we just, I get very frustrated in trying to validate the accuracy, again, repeating myself. But is there any cross-reference between what we might have here in your archives or our archive, like concerning to other states or especially Tennessee?
Not that I'm aware of, as far as, of course we have our collections and things, and we don't have any electronic connection between a different state or anything like that. The internet's great, but it's light years from having something where you can go to another state and have them cross-reference, which I think Ancestry tries to do that in some of the materials and things, but it's nowhere that's happened yet. Especially
how accurate would you think it would be if you can go back, say, 5 or 6 generations within Ancestry.com, and you can find the child connected, or a child's name that's connected throughout the cycle as you go backwards?
This is my view on with family trees and things like that. And if you're not quoting a primary document, and there's several types of primary documents, there's birth records, death records, and things like that. If you're not quoting and you're looking at 1600s and things like that, that's very difficult in my mind to actually be a valid. It's very difficult unless you have some kind of document actually linking from one to the next.
Yeah, all of the ancestry that I could find were a very fertile group. And there would be anywhere from 8 to 10 or more children in each group. And after a while, the names would start repeating themselves.
Oh,
So you find yourself in a situation of saying, did I go down the wrong avenue here?
Sometimes it's a leap of faith, they say, for,
If you have a local, and local could be, I guess, far, chapters of Sons of the American Revolution or Daughters of the American Revolution, they would have a registrar with their chapter, and if you can give them the registrar of the DAR or SAR chapter, about 3 or 4 generations back, they can go into the DAR, SAR records and take you back. And that's what I did. I found out that Shadrach Turner was a farmer in Ridgeway, Virginia, and gave horses to the George Washington or somebody, and that's how I proved my DAR. I didn't really go through all that research, but the registrar did.
sometimes,
The DAR was not really good at verifying stuff until very recently.
I only joined 2 years ago.
And I wouldn't trust without looking at the primary sources myself, anything
from
the
primary
DAR.
sources is the,
Well, SAR is even iffier, because DAR won't take SAR, and SAR will take DAR.
There's a thing now called Genealogical Proof Standard. I suggest you look that up on the internet, and that gives you a guideline of genealogical proof standard. And it's professional genealogists who are trying to do the very thing you do and figure out what's fact and what's not so factual. And they talk about primary documents, secondary documents.
I haven't read that, but
But
I've been
it gives
through
you some
lectures
guidelines.
concerning primary and secondary.
It gives you some guidelines.
all right. Thank you very much. Remember, coming up in March is when we're going to start doing the forest collections, and I remind you that any collections that you want to see, let us know, or come in, and we'll pull them down for you. Thank you very much.